The Sengoku period is widely considered to be the worst era in Japanese history because of all the death and destruction that came with the constant warring. But it had major impacts on Japan's culture, politics, religion, and military. The Sengoku period was a terrible time in Japanese history and caused the death of many people in Japan. States were constantly at war with each other, and as technology began to better, the death toll began to grow. While the death toll may have been high, so was the impact on the future of Japan. An explanation of the Sengoku period. The Ashikaga shogunate was in control of the central area of Japan. The capital in Heian was a bureaucracy that worked pretty well, but the other areas were left semi-independent and ruled by daimyos, which were local warlords. The daimyo commanded their own personal army of samurai or others that were willing to fight. The armies existed for the purpose of defending the estate while also expanding it. The daimyo mostly consisted of aristocrats or military governors who became independent as the shogunate grew weak. A smaller group of daimyos were sons of tradesmen that gathered smaller armies and overthrew pre-existing states. This became known as gekujo, and it became very common, which led to all the feudal estates in the absence of central power. This is when all the wars began, starting with the Onin War. The Onin War was based on two families that backed different candidates for shogun. This war never saw a victor and only sparked more and more civil wars, with no one achieving true dominance. The Onin War, however, did sort out the strong and weak daimyo. Towns and cities began to grow with trade because protection was sought in numbers. With all the pillaging, castles began to be built in cities to add to the protection of the numbers. The warring would not begin to end until the Ashikaga shogunate was ended by warlord Oda Nobunaga. Oda Nobunaga eventually seized control of Heian and then exiled the last Ashikaga shogun. Oda Nobunaga successfully unified Japan, which continued to his successors and ended the Sengoku period. Culture was impacted greatly by the Sengoku period. The samurai that fought in the wars continue to be part of Japan's culture. While you may not see them fighting in great wars, they are integrated in all sorts of things and are almost a mascot for Japan. Samurai didn't just impact Japan, but they are part of things all over the world due to their popularity in Japan. Another important part of Japanese culture that came from the Sengoku period was art. The art is used to this day and inspires new and different types of art. A big example of the impact of past art is in animation. Japanese animation has many similarities to the works of art from the Sengoku period. Politics in Japan were majorly changed by the Sengoku period. The most important is the unification of Japan. With the unification, there was a long era of peace because of the people's loyalty to the leader. Japan was no longer split all over, and they came together under the centralized government. Japan continues to be unified, but not under one big ruler. Though the respect the shogun was given is still given to the government today. A status system came from the end of the Sengoku period, with peasants at the bottom and all ruling emperor at the top. This eventually came to an end, with only a few aspects still being a part of Japan today. Many major aspects of the Japanese military became big in the Sengoku period. A big example is the first use of guns. Guns were brought by the Europeans through international trade. The guns led to better strategy for different Japanese estates, and strategy with guns led to a lot of casualties. Pikes were also big in strategy during the Sengoku period, but they are not used nearly as much as guns. Mass infantry became huge. Soldiers would gather into different formations with mostly ranged weapons so they could stay back and have less death. Mass infantry continues to be a part of militaries in places all over the world and not just in Japan. With all the new technology and strategies, by the end of Sengoku period, samurai were coming to an end, which was the end of a major era in Japanese history. Religion was impacted greatly, but then it began to return how it was originally. Oda Nobunaga completely got rid of parts of Buddhism, which was the biggest religion in the country at the time. Shintoism also began to fall with the ruling of Nobunaga. Neo-Confucianism took over and impacted many people's lives because it became their ideology. Eventually, though, Neo-Confucianism was forced away and the old religions began to return. While Neo-Confucianism isn't prominent anymore, it still impacts some people's lives today. Buddhism and Shintoism began to rise again as the two big religions in Japan. And today, just about everybody in Japan is either Buddhist or Shinto. In conclusion, Japan was hurt in many ways from the Sengoku period with all the death and destruction, but the impacts, good and bad, were major. Japanese culture is inspired by many things from the Sengoku period today. The country became unified and was no longer split everywhere. The Japanese military completely evolved simply by fighting each other, and religion was taken away but was gained back once better leaders were in charge. Nothing about what happened to people in states in the Sengoku period was good, but to this day the impact is still felt in all sorts of good ways.